Sometimes life has a way of bringing people back to where they never expected to be. For Emily Monroe, a determined but struggling designer, and Ryan Caldwell, a wealthy businessman with a past full of regrets, a chance encounter in an upscale restaurant sets their lives on an unexpected path. Emily, juggling a demanding job and an unsteady design business while preparing for the arrival of her baby, has learned to face every challenge alone. But when opportunities suddenly begin to find her clients calling, doors opening, and small acts of kindness appearing out of nowhere, Emily begins to question who might be pulling the strings behind the scenes. For Ryan, seeing Emily again forces him to confront the mistakes of his past and the choices that tore them apart. With quiet determination, he tries to make things right without her knowing. But good intentions are rarely simple, and as Emily begins to uncover the truth, she's left to decide if she can trust the man who once let her down. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the city skyline as Ryan Caldwell leaned back in his leather seat. Through the tinted windows of his car, the world outside buzzed with energy, pedestrians rushing home, traffic lights blinking, and distant sirens fading into the hum of the evening. Inside the sleek confines of his black sedan, silence reigned. It was a far cry from the city's chaos, yet Ryan felt anything but calm. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a night to toast the success of his company's biggest product launch to date. The years of relentless work, long nights, and sacrifices had finally paid off. People called him a visionary, a self-made success story. At 40, Ryan was at the top of his game, the CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, a name synonymous with cutting-edge business strategies and billion-dollar deals. Beside him, Claire Bennett scrolled through her phone. She was dressed for the occasion, as always. Her emerald green dress shimmered under the fading light, perfectly complementing her composed beauty. Claire reflected the life Ryan had carefully built. Polished, sophisticated, and untouchable. Claire glanced up from her phone. "We're going to love this place. It is the talk of the city." Ryan nodded absently. "It should be perfect for tonight." The driver stopped the car in front of Ambrosia, the newest luxury restaurant that had already earned a reputation among the elite. Its sleek glass facade reflected the glow of the city lights, welcoming its carefully curated guests. Ryan stepped out first, the crisp evening air brushing against his face as Claire gracefully emerged beside him. Together, they entered the restaurant like they owned the place. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet elegance. The hum of muted conversation, the soft clinking of silverware, and the faint scent of truffle and spices set the tone. Waiters in black uniforms glided between tables, carrying artfully plated dishes. The space was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed view of the city, while golden light fixtures hung like art installations from the ceiling. Ryan and Claire were led to a corner table draped in white linen, far enough from the center of the room for privacy, but close enough to observe the atmosphere. Ryan eased into his chair and exhaled, trying to shake off the unease he could not quite place. Claire seemed oblivious, already immersed in the menu. "You need to try their scallop appetizer," Claire said, her tone light. "It's supposed to be divine." Ryan smiled faintly and opened his menu, but before he could scan the options, movement across the room caught his eye. A waitress moved between tables, carrying a tray with careful precision. There was something familiar about her, something in the way she held herself, the way her dark hair was tied back loosely, strands falling against her cheek. Ryan's heart skipped a beat. It could not be. As the waitress turned slightly, Ryan's chest tightened. It was her. Emily Monroe, the woman he had once loved, the woman he had driven away. His throat went dry as he watched her place dishes in front of another table. She had changed. The Emily he remembered always wore sharp blazers and flowing dresses that exuded quiet confidence. Now, she wore a simple black blouse and apron, her uniform a stark contrast to the elegance around her. Her face, though still beautiful, looked tired. There were faint shadows under her eyes, and her movements lacked the effortless grace she once had. And then, as she shifted her weight slightly to one side, Ryan noticed the unmistakable curve of her stomach. Emily was pregnant. His heart lurched, emotions colliding, shock, confusion, and a wave of guilt he thought he had buried long ago. "Ryan?" Claire's voice broke through his daze. "You are a million miles away." He blinked, forcing himself to look at her. "Sorry, just thinking about work." Claire gave him a curious glance but returned to the menu, clearly deciding not to pry. Ryan swallowed hard and let his gaze drift back to Emily. It had been 6 years since their marriage had ended, 6 years since the final argument that had pushed her to walk away, saying she could no longer come second to his work. At the time, Ryan had justified it all. He had been building something monumental, something for both of them, or so he told himself. But sitting here now, watching Emily as she moved through the room, he wondered if he had been fooling himself all along. Suddenly, Emily was approaching their table. Ryan's pulse quickened as he braced himself, unsure what to say or how to act. She stopped beside them, her face calm and professional, though her eyes gave nothing away. "Good evening. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Her voice, it was the same steady, clear tone that used to reassure him after a hard day. For a moment, Ryan could not find his words. Claire smiled. "I will have a glass of your finest Chardonnay." Emily scribbled the order onto her notepad, her focus shifting to Ryan. "And for you, sir?" Their eyes met for the briefest second, and in that moment, Ryan saw a flicker of something: recognition, sadness, perhaps even resentment. "Water. Sparkling, please," Ryan replied, his voice quieter than he intended. Emily nodded, scribbled the order, and walked away without another word. Ryan's chest tightened as he watched her disappear into the sea of diners. She had not acknowledged him beyond what was necessary. Her detachment stung in ways he could not explain. "Are you sure you are all right?" Claire asked, looking at him with narrowed eyes. "I am fine," Ryan said too quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." Claire nodded, but her expression held doubt. She returned to her conversation about their upcoming trip to Paris, about galleries they would visit and dinners they would attend. Ryan nodded when necessary, but his thoughts drifted back to Emily. Throughout the evening, his gaze kept searching for her, watching as she navigated the restaurant with practiced ease. She was polite but distant, never lingering at a table longer than necessary. Ryan wondered how she had ended up here. She had been so driven, so full of dreams when they were together. Emily Monroe was the kind of woman who left an impression on everyone she met. To see her waiting tables, visibly worn down and carrying a baby on her own, unsettled him deeply. "Ryan." Claire's voice was sharper this time. He looked at her. "Sorry. What?" "I said, are you ready to order?" He glanced at the menu, but could not focus. "Whatever you recommend," he muttered. Claire sighed, ordering for both of them, before returning to her observations of the people around them. Ryan leaned back in his chair, trying to process the knot of emotions inside him. Emily's face lingered in his mind, along with memories of their life together, late nights, laughing in their first apartment, arguing over his missed dinners, and the quiet way she had packed her things the day she left. When the evening ended, and Ryan and Claire stepped back into the night air, Ryan's mood remained heavy. The car was waiting for them, but as he held the door open for Claire, he glanced back at the restaurant's glowing entrance. Inside, Emily was somewhere, moving through another shift, as if she had not just upended his carefully constructed world. "Ryan?" Claire asked, already seated. "Coming," he murmured, sliding in beside her. As the car pulled away, the lights of the city blurred outside his window. Ryan sat in silence, his mind racing. The life he had built had always felt solid, unshakable. But tonight, For the first time in years, he felt the faintest cracks forming in its foundation. And in those cracks, he saw Emily tired, resilient, pregnant, and strong, reminding him of everything he had lost and everything he might still have to gain. The city sprawled out below Ryan Caldwell like a canvas of twinkling lights. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, a whiskey glass in hand, but the drink remained untouched. Outside, the skyline was alive, cars flowing like rivers of light, and the hum of life carrying on. But Ryan felt far removed from it all. His penthouse was quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of silence that amplified his thoughts, the kind of stillness that forced him to look at things he usually buried under back-to-back meetings, investor calls, and endless business dinners. Emily Monroe. Her face lingered in his mind like a ghost. The way her voice had been steady, yet distant. The way she had avoided his eyes, making her message perfectly clear. "You are just another customer." Ryan sank into the leather couch, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the table. 6 years. It had been 6 long years since the day she walked out of their shared apartment. He still remembered the final argument like it had just happened yesterday. "I do not need all of this, Ryan," she had said, her voice shaking but her words firm. "I need you. But you are never here. You are too busy chasing something that means nothing to me." He had brushed it off then. Emily's complaints had felt small compared to his ambitions. He had thought she would understand that once Caldwell Enterprises reached the top, they would both reap the rewards. But by the time he looked up from his spreadsheets and phone calls, she was gone. Now, she was back in his life, or at least, back in his line of sight, pregnant, alone, waiting tables in a restaurant she never would have stepped foot in before. Ryan ran a hand through his hair and let out a long breath. The woman he had loved, the woman who had believed in him when no one else did, had clearly been through more than he could fathom, and it unsettled him. Why was she working there? What had happened to the driven, ambitious woman who once dreamed of starting her own design firm? And the baby who was the father? Was she really on her own? The questions swirled in his mind, refusing to let him rest. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. Claire's name flashed on the screen. Ryan hesitated before picking up. "Hey," he said, trying to sound more present than he felt. "Hey yourself," Claire replied, her voice light. "You got quiet on me earlier tonight. Everything all right?" Ryan pinched the bridge of his nose. "Yeah, just tired. It has been a long week." "Sure." Her tone held a faint trace of doubt. "Anyway, I have been looking at villas for our Paris trip next month. I will send you the links. Let me know which one you prefer, okay?" "Sounds good," Ryan said, though he barely registered her words. There was a beat of silence before Claire added, "Ryan, you are working too hard again. Try to relax a little. You have earned it." "Yeah, I will. Good night then." "Good night." The call ended, leaving him alone again in the cavernous space. Ryan looked around the penthouse, a perfect reflection of his life. Expensive, impeccable, empty. He thought about the restaurant again, about the way Emily had moved through the room, clearly tired but pushing through. He could not reconcile the memory of her as the ambitious, bright-eyed woman he had married with the person he saw tonight. It made something stir in his chest. Guilt, yes, but also something more complicated. His phone sat on the table, taunting him. After a moment's hesitation, Ryan picked it up and scrolled through his contacts until he found a familiar name, Sarah Matthews. Sarah had been a mutual friend, someone who stayed close to Emily after the divorce. Ryan had not spoken to her in years, mostly because he had avoided anyone who reminded him of Emily. But tonight, he needed answers. The phone rang twice before Sarah picked up. "Hello?" "Hi, Sarah. It is Ryan Caldwell." There was a long pause on the other end. "Ryan," she said finally, her tone wary. "This is unexpected. How have you been?" I am good, I am fine, Ryan said awkwardly. I, I ran into Emily tonight. Another pause. Oh, she was at Ambrosia, working. She… Ryan hesitated, unsure how much to say. She looked different. Sarah's tone softened. I see. What do you want, Ryan? I just… Is she okay? Why do you care? Sarah asked sharply. It has been 6 years. The words stung, but Ryan could not deny their truth. I know. I have no right to ask. But seeing her tonight? She is pregnant, Sarah. And she is working there. Sarah let out a long sigh. Emily is strong, Ryan. She has been through a lot, but she does not want anyone's pity. I am not asking to pity her, Ryan said quietly. I just want to understand. Sarah hesitated before replying. After the divorce, Emily left her corporate job. She wanted to start her own interior design firm. For a while, things were good. She had a small roster of clients, and her business was starting to grow. But, as you probably know, small businesses are unpredictable. The market shifted, and the work dried up. Ryan's chest tightened. Emily had always talked about starting her own business. He remembered how excited she had been when she got her first freelance client. He should have been there to support her, but he had been too wrapped up in his own goals. And the baby? He asked softly. The father is not in the picture, Sarah said. It was not serious. When she told him about the pregnancy, he walked away. Emily decided to keep the baby and face it on her own. Ryan leaned back against the couch, Sarah's words weighing on him. Emily strong, stubborn, Emily was doing it all alone. The idea of her struggling to keep her business afloat while carrying a child made his guilt cut even deeper. She never asked for help? Sarah scoffed lightly. You know Emily. She would rather walk through fire than ask for help. Ryan nodded, his throat tight. Thank you, Sarah, for telling me. Ryan, Sarah said after a moment, her voice softer, if you really want to help her, do not go barging in and trying to fix everything. Emily does not need saving. She just needs people who care. The call ended, leaving Ryan staring at the phone in his hand. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down at everything he had lost. Emily was proud. He knew that better than anyone. If he tried to throw money at her problems, she would push him away. If he tried to fix things for her, she would see it as an insult to her strength. But what could he do? How could he help her without crossing the line? Ryan set the phone down and looked out the window again. His mind was a tangle of memories and regrets, but somewhere in the mess, a thought began to form. If Emily would not ask for help, he would find a way to help without her knowing. Quietly. Carefully. He could not go back and change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference now. The idea gave him something he had not felt in years, a flicker of purpose. For the first time in a long time, Ryan felt a pull towards something real. Ryan sat in his office the following morning, the weight of the previous night pressing heavily on his shoulders. His sleek, minimalist office on the top floor of Caldwell Enterprises was usually a sanctuary, a place of precision and control where decisions were made and empires were built. But today, it felt suffocating. The skyline stretched endlessly outside the massive windows, but it offered no solace. He turned away from the view and stared at the stack of reports on his desk. Numbers, projections, contracts. Normally they would consume his every thought, not today. His mind kept drifting back to Emily, her tired eyes, the swell of her stomach, and Sarah's words from the night before. She doesn't need saving. She just needs people who care. A knock at the door broke the silence. Claire, his assistant, efficient and composed as always, stepped in, holding a file. Your 10 a.m. meeting is waiting in the conference room. Ryan looked up, blinking as though he had been pulled from a dream. Cancel it. Claire paused, eyebrows raised. Excuse me? Cancel it. Reschedule for later this week. She hesitated. Ryan Caldwell never missed meetings. He was known for his sharp focus and reliability, but his tone left no room for argument. Understood, she said briskly. Anything else? Ryan shook his head. That will be all, Claire. She left without another word, though he caught the curiosity lingering in her gaze. As the door clicked shut, Ryan exhaled slowly and picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over his contacts before settling on a familiar name, Sarah Matthews. It was still early, but he knew Sarah would understand why he was calling. He hit dial. Ryan, Sarah answered, her tone cautious. Is everything okay? Yeah, he replied quickly, though it felt like a lie. I have been thinking about what you said. About Emily. Sarah sighed. Ryan, I told you she doesn't need someone to come in and try to fix her life. She's stronger than you think. I know that, Ryan said firmly. I am not trying to fix her. I need to help. Quietly. Without her knowing, it was me. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Why? Sarah asked softly. Ryan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Because I owe her. For everything. I pushed her away, Sarah. I was so consumed with myself and this company that I let her go. And now, he paused, struggling to find the words. Seeing her last night. It hit me. She's doing this on her own, and it is not right. She wouldn't want your pity. It's not pities, Ryan insisted. It's something else. I don't know how to explain it. I just need to know she's okay. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Ryan could almost hear her weighing her response. Finally, she spoke. If you really want to help, I have an idea. But it has to be subtle. I'll do whatever it takes, Ryan said quickly. Sarah hesitated before continuing. Emily's interior design business was her dream, but she's been struggling to get clients. If you want to help her, put your connections to work discreetly. Recommend her to people you trust, but don't tell them it's you pushing her work. Let her talent speak for itself. Ryan considered it. That could work. And one more thing, Sarah added. Make sure she doesn't find out it's you. If she does, she'll shut it down in an instant. Understood, Ryan said. Thank you, Sarah. You'd better mean it, Ryan, Sarah replied. Emily deserves people who follow through. The call ended, leaving Ryan with a mix of nerves and determination. He glanced at the stack of business cards in the corner of his desk contacts from years of networking. People who trusted his word without question. If Emily needed clients, he would find them, and he would make sure her business thrived on her merit, not his name. That afternoon, Ryan took the first step. He sifted through his contacts, identifying people who might need design work, real estate developers, small business owners, and interior design enthusiasts. He made careful calls, framing his recommendations casually. There's a designer I came across recently, he said during one conversation with a property developer he knew. She's sharp, creative, and has a fresh perspective. You should check out her work. Who is she? The developer asked, intrigued. Emily Monroe, Ryan replied, careful not to add more. I think she's worth your time. By the time the day ended, Ryan had planted seeds with half a dozen contacts. He felt a strange mix of satisfaction and apprehension, knowing that what came next was out of his hands. Emily's talent would have to do the rest. A week later, Emily sat in her tiny studio, a converted corner of her apartment, skimming through her notebook of design sketches. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her focus. She glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. Curious, she picked up. Hello? Hi, is this Emily Monroe? The voice was polished and professional. Yes, it is, Emily replied, her brow furrowed. My name is David Foster. I'm a property developer working on a boutique apartment project downtown. I came across your name and your design portfolio, and I'd like to talk to you about collaborating on the project. Emily sat up straighter. Oh, of course. How did you find my portfolio, if you don't mind me asking? A business associate mentioned you, David said, his tone casual. Your work is exactly what we're looking for. Emily blinked, momentarily stunned. I'd love to discuss this further, she said, trying to sound composed despite the thrill rising in her chest. They arranged to meet the following day. When the call ended, Emily set her phone down and stared at the wall in disbelief. Opportunities like this did not fall into her lap, not lately. Her business had been struggling for months. She had poured everything into it, working late into the nights, living on the edge of her savings, and picking up shifts at Ambrosia just to make rent. But this was the kind of chance she had been hoping for. Someone mentioned my name. Emily frowned, wondering who could have recommended her. None of her recent clients had that kind of influence, but whoever it was, she owed them. The next day, she met David Foster at a trendy coffee shop downtown. He was polite and enthusiastic, outlining his project with clear admiration for her work. As Emily listened, a flicker of excitement reignited inside her, a feeling she had not experienced in a long time. By the time the meeting ended, Emily had a contract in hand. She could hardly believe it. As she walked back to her car, clutching the folder tightly, tears prickled the edges of her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt like things were turning around. That evening, Ryan sat alone in his penthouse, nursing a glass of water as the city lights flickered outside. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at it, seeing a text from Sarah. She got a big project today. I think your plan worked. Ryan exhaled, his shoulders easing slightly. He could almost picture Emily's face when she received the news, surprised, maybe a little hopeful. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline. For the first time in years, his focus wasn't on contracts or deals. It was on something real, something that mattered. As he sat there, a quiet realization settled over him. He could not change the past, but he could choose to be different now. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Emily stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, tugging at the sleeves of her navy blazer. It had been a long time since she dressed like this, sharp, polished, and confident. The blazer was an old favorite she had worn during her best years as a corporate designer. Now, paired with pressed slacks and a crisp blouse, it felt like armor, something to remind her who she used to be. On her desk, the project proposal from David Foster sat neatly in a folder. The boutique apartment job could be a game-changer for her struggling design business. It felt surreal that someone like David, an established property developer, had approached her at all. She still did not know who had mentioned her name, but for now, she was too busy being grateful to question it. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. Sarah Matthews. Emily smiled faintly and picked up. Hey, Sarah. Morning, Sarah replied, her voice warm. Just checking in. You have that big meeting today, right? Yeah, I'm heading out soon, Emily said. It still feels too good to be true. It's not, Sarah reassured her. You deserve this, Em. You've been working so hard, even when everything felt impossible. This is your break. Emily's smile softened. Thanks, Sarah. I don't know what I'd do without you. Sarah laughed lightly. I'll hold you to that when I make you buy me lunch. Go knock 'em dead, all right? I will. Emily ended the call and grabbed her bag, giving herself one last look in the mirror before stepping out the door. The meeting with David Foster went better than Emily could have imagined. He was impressed by her design ideas and praised her attention to detail. They walked through the project together, David pointing out specific areas he wanted to highlight: warm, inviting spaces that balance style and comfort. This is a high-end development, David said as they wrapped up. But I want it to feel livable, not just another showroom. I think your approach captures that perfectly. Emily nodded, her heart swelling with pride. That's always been my goal, designing spaces that people connect with. David smiled. Then I'd say we're a perfect match for this project. By the time Emily left his office, the contract was signed, and her mind was buzzing with ideas. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel hopeful. Later that evening, Emily was back at Ambrosia, slipping into the black uniform that had begun to feel like a second skin. The contrast between her design meeting and her evening shift was jarring, going from sophisticated discussions about blueprints to wiping down tables and refilling water glasses. But she needed this job. The project with David was a start, not a solution. Bills still had to be paid, and the baby was due in a matter of months. As Emily moved through the restaurant, she thought of her earlier meeting and how different life had been 6 years ago. Back then, she had believed in a future filled with possibility. She and Ryan had been partners in every sense, dreamer building something together, until they weren't. She pushed the thought aside as she approached a new table. "Good evening. Can I get you started with some drinks?" She had perfected the art of professional distance, her voice steady and calm no matter how exhausted she felt. But as the man at the table looked up, her breath caught. Ryan Caldwell. He was alone this time, his presence somehow quieter than it had been the week before. He looked at her, and for a moment his expression softened not with pity, but with something else, something she could not name. "Emily," he said quietly. She tightened her grip on the notepad, forcing her voice to stay level. "Mr. Caldwell, can I get you something?" Ryan's lips pressed together as though her formality stung, but he recovered quickly. "Just water. Still, please." "Of course." Emily turned sharply on her heel, heading toward the kitchen. Her heart was pounding, her mind spinning. What is he doing here again? When she returned with the water, Ryan was waiting, his hands clasped on the table as if he had been rehearsing what to say. She set the glass down, ready to walk away, but his voice stopped her. "Emily, wait." She looked at him, keeping her face neutral. "What do you need, Mr. Caldwell?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Can we talk? Please. Just for a few minutes." "Talk about what?" "About you. About how you're doing." Emily blinked at him, thrown off by his tone. It wasn't condescending or smug. It sounded genuine, almost pleading. She glanced around the restaurant, ensuring no one was watching. "I'm working, Ryan. This isn't the time." "Then meet me after your shift," he said quickly. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse to tell him she owed him nothing, but another part of her, the part still haunted by their history, was curious. What did he want? Finally, she nodded once. "Fine. 5 minutes. Out back." Ryan let out a breath, as though he'd been holding it. "Thank you." Emily turned away before he could say anything else, ignoring the flutter in her chest that she couldn't quite explain. The alley behind Ambrosia was quiet when Emily stepped outside at the end of her shift. The city noise was distant here, muffled by the brick walls and soft glow of a streetlight. Ryan was waiting, his hands in the pockets of his charcoal coat, looking strangely out of place in the gritty back lot. 5 minutes, Emily said, crossing her arms. "Go." Ryan nodded, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. "I don't know where to start," he admitted. "Seeing you here, it's not what I expected." Emily raised an eyebrow. "And what did you expect?" Ryan flinched slightly at her tone. "I don't know, but not this. I heard about your design business. Sarah mentioned it." Emily's jaw tightened. "Sarah had no right to tell you anything." "She didn't tell me much," Ryan said quickly. "Just that you've been working hard, that you've been doing this on your own." Emily looked away, her fingers curling around her arms. "I'm fine, Ryan. I don't need you checking in like I'm some charity case." "It's not like that," Ryan said softly. I wanted to know if you were okay." Emily met his gaze, searching for any hint of pity, but there was none. Instead, she saw something unexpected: regret, maybe even admiration. It threw her off balance. "I'm fine," she said again, but her voice lacked its usual steel. Ryan hesitated. Is there anything I can do? Anything you need? Emily shook her head. You don't get to walk back into my life after 6 years and play savior, Ryan. I don't need your help. I don't need you. Her words landed like blows, but Ryan didn't flinch. He nodded slowly, accepting them. Okay, he said quietly. I get it, but I'm here if you ever change your mind. Emily stared at him, her chest tight. She didn't know if she was angry, hurt, or something else entirely. Before she could sort through it, Ryan turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the alley. Left alone, Emily let out a shaky breath. She had spent years convincing herself that Ryan Caldwell was part of a closed chapter, sealed and forgotten. Yet here he was, tearing through the edges of her carefully constructed life. As she stood there, the weight of the evening settling in, Emily realized something else. For the first time in years, Ryan wasn't just a memory. He was here, in the present, asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. And that terrified her more than anything. The morning light streamed weakly through Emily's apartment window, casting soft shadows on the walls. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor, Henry's tiny bassinet propped near the couch where she could keep an eye on it. Her desk was covered in fabric swatches, architectural sketches, and client proposals, an organized mess that had become her new normal. Despite the fatigue pressing on her shoulders, Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile as she glanced at the contract from David Foster's project. It still felt unreal to have landed such a substantial job. After months of struggling to find steady work, she finally felt like the momentum she had been fighting for was returning. Her phone buzzed, vibrating against the cluttered desk. She grabbed it instinctively, expecting another reminder from the restaurant about her evening shift, but instead, it was an unknown number. Her chest tightened slightly. Hello? Is this Emily Monroe? A polished voice asked. Yes, this is Emily. Hi, this is Angela Carter. I own Carter Designs, the showroom in Midtown. A colleague of mine, David Foster, mentioned your work to me, and I took a look at your portfolio online. I'm actually in need of a designer for a small commercial project, a boutique office redesign, and I think your style could be the perfect fit. Would you have time to meet and discuss it further? Emily's mouth fell slightly open, caught between surprise and cautious disbelief. Another opportunity, just days after landing David's project? Yes, I'd love to meet, she said quickly, trying to sound composed despite the rush of excitement rising in her chest. When are you available? They settled on a meeting later that week, and when the call ended, Emily dropped her phone onto the table, stunned. David Foster was one thing, a lucky break, maybe. But this? Someone else had found her work and reached out. She could not help but wonder how it had all suddenly begun to change. The days that followed brought a strange sense of hope Emily had not felt in years. She moved carefully, almost afraid that if she let herself relax too much, the opportunities would disappear. Her routine stayed the same: shifts at Ambrosia in the evenings, meetings and design work during the day, but something had shifted in her. The exhaustion that clung to her every step felt just a little lighter. At the restaurant one evening, as she cleared a table near the window, her manager, Darren, caught up to her with a grin. "You've been glowing lately, Monroe," he said, nudging her lightly with his elbow. "New boyfriend or something?" Emily rolled her eyes, a small laugh escaping her lips. "Very funny, Darren. I'm just busy, that's all." "Well, whatever it is, keep it up. I haven't seen you smile in months," Darren said, before wandering back toward the kitchen. Emily paused, wiping her hands on the edge of her apron. She glanced out the window at the streetlights beginning to glow in the dusk. It was true, she had been smiling more. Even though life was still far from perfect, she felt a spark of purpose returning to her. Small wins, she thought to herself. Small wins are still winning. Across town, Ryan Caldwell sat at his office desk, staring at an email on his screen. Angela Carter. I met with Emily Monroe today. You were right. She's exactly what I've been looking for. Thanks for pointing me her way. Ryan exhaled, his fingers tapping a thoughtful rhythm on the desk. It was working. Quietly, carefully, he had been nudging opportunities toward Emily, connecting her with people he trusted, people who would see her work for what it was. Exceptional. But this was as far as he would go. He had promised himself that he would help from the shadows, no strings attached. Emily didn't need to know it was him. If she thought even for a second that he was trying to play savior, she would shut him out completely. Mr. Caldwell? Ryan looked up to find Claire standing in the doorway of his office, holding her tablet. Your board presentation is in 15 minutes. Thanks, Claire, Ryan said, leaning back in his chair. I'll be there soon. Claire tilted her head slightly, studying him. You've seemed distracted this week. Is everything okay? I'm fine, Ryan said automatically. She raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. All right, let me know if you need anything. As she turned to leave, Ryan's gaze drifted back to his screen, where Angela's email remained open. It was the second message, like this he had received, in as many days. A small part of him felt pride in knowing he was helping Emily's business grow, even if she didn't realize it. But there was also something else, a nagging question he couldn't shake. Why had it taken seeing her again to finally wake up? Emily's meeting with Angela Carter went even better than she had hoped. The boutique office project was small but detailed, with room for creativity, exactly the kind of work Emily loved. As she sat across from Angela in the brightly lit showroom, explaining her ideas and sketching quick designs, Angela smiled approvingly. You're passionate about this, Angela said, leaning back in her chair. I like that. A lot of designers are talented, but it's the ones who care about the work who really stand out. Thank you, Emily said, her cheeks flushing. Angela folded her hands on the table. How long have you been running your own business? Emily hesitated, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. A couple of years. It hasn't always been easy, but I believe in it. Angela nodded thoughtfully. Keep believing in it, Emily. You're going places. The words lingered with Emily as she left the meeting, clutching her bag tightly. Angela's confidence in her felt unfamiliar, like a voice she hadn't heard in years whispering, You can do this. As Emily walked back to her car, she caught sight of her reflection in a shop window. She looked different, tired, yes, but there was something else there now. A quiet strength. Her phone buzzed with a message from Darren, her manager at Ambrosia. Can you pick up an extra shift tomorrow? Short on staff. Emily let out a sigh, her shoulders slumping. The reality of her situation grounded her like a stone. Her business was gaining traction, but it was not enough yet. She still needed to work. She still had bills to pay, a baby to prepare for. She typed out a quick reply. Sure, I'll be there. That evening, Ryan found himself parked near Ambrosia, his hands gripping the steering wheel. It wasn't planned he had been driving home when he turned down the familiar street. Now, as he sat there watching the restaurant, a strange mix of nerves and frustration churned inside him. The lights from inside cast a soft glow onto the sidewalk, and through the glass windows he could see Emily moving between tables, her hair tied back neatly. Even from a distance, he could see the faint weariness in her steps, the weight she carried. She's still working there, Ryan muttered to himself. Part of him wanted to go inside, to tell her she didn't have to do this anymore, to say he could help, that he wanted to help. But he knew Emily better than that. Pride was woven into her very being. If he pushed too hard, she'd shut him out forever. So instead, he sat there watching, useless, for all his resources and power, and wondering what he could possibly do to make things right. Emily returned home late that night, her feet aching and her shoulders tight with exhaustion. She set her bag on the floor, glanced at the small pile of unopened baby gifts in the corner of the room, hand-me-downs from Sarah and a few neighbors, and sank onto the couch. She closed her eyes for a moment, the fatigue pressing down on her, but then she thought of Angela Carter. She thought of David Foster. She thought of the spark she felt in their meetings, like a flame that had refused to go out, no matter how hard the wind tried to snuff it. Small wins, she thought again, letting herself smile just a little. They were just small steps, but for now, they were enough to keep her going. Emily stood at the window of her small apartment, cradling a warm mug of tea between her hands. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped below the buildings, casting streaks of orange and gold across the city skyline. The soft hum of distant traffic buzzed faintly, but inside, all was quiet. She took a deep breath, her gaze drifting across the living room. The apartment was modest, but it had grown to feel like home, her home. The gray couch was worn but clean. A small stack of design magazines sat neatly on the coffee table, and Henry's bassinet rested beside the armchair, waiting for him to arrive. A few plants in mismatched pots lined the windowsill, adding a touch of life to the space. Her eyes fell to her desk in the corner, now cluttered with client files and scattered swatches. The sight stirred a faint flicker of pride in her chest. Carter Designs had officially signed the contract yesterday, and Emily already had a handful of ideas sketched out for their boutique office project. Between that and David Foster's apartment development, her design business finally felt like it had a pulse again. It had been months, no, years since she'd felt this kind of momentum, and while the work wasn't easy, the thrill of creating something meaningful brought her a spark of energy she hadn't felt in a long time. She gently pressed a hand to her belly, smiling faintly. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, as if Henry could hear her. "I promise." Meanwhile, across town, Ryan sat at his office desk, his fingers drumming restlessly on the polished wood surface. The skyline outside his window was blurred by a haze of low clouds, but Ryan hardly noticed. His attention was fixed on the email glowing on his screen. David Foster. The collaboration with Emily Monroe is going great so far. Her ideas are fresh, and she's been incredibly professional. Thanks for pointing me in her direction. A sense of quiet satisfaction settled over him. It was working. Emily's business was gaining traction, and Ryan could already see her rebuilding the life she deserved, one small step at a time. Yet the feeling was bittersweet. He was helping her, yes, but from a distance. There were no thanks, no shared smiles or acknowledgement. Emily didn't know, and that was how it had to be. Ryan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had spent years fixing problems with money, solving everything with a phone call or a signature on a check. But this was different. Emily didn't need saving, and for the first time in his life, Ryan was learning how to step back and let someone else carry their own weight. The realization unsettled him. Why does it still feel like it's not enough? That evening, Emily arrived at Ambrosia 10 minutes early for her shift. The restaurant was already humming with activity servers setting tables, the kitchen clattering with noise, and the faint scent of garlic and herbs wafting through the air. Darren, her manager, was at the front counter scanning a clipboard when he looked up and spotted her. "Monroe, you're here early." "I had some extra time," Emily replied, tucking her hair back into a loose ponytail. Darren grinned. "You're in luck. I've got news that'll make your day." Emily frowned slightly. "News?" He handed her a small white envelope. "A customer left this for you yesterday after your shift. Said it was a thank you for great service." Emily blinked, surprised. "A thank you?" "See for yourself." She opened the envelope carefully, her brows furrowing as she pulled out a crisp $100 bill. Her breath caught. Tucked inside was a small handwritten note that read, "You're doing a great job. Keep going. The world needs people like you." Emily stared at the note, her heart twisting in a way she couldn't quite describe. "Must have been one of the regulars," Darren said casually. "People notice when someone works hard, Monroe. Good for you." Emily nodded absently, slipping the note back into the envelope and tucking it into her apron pocket. "Thanks, Darren." As she walked toward the back to clock in, she turned the note over in her mind. Something about it felt so personal. It wasn't flashy or condescending, just simple encouragement, something Emily hadn't received in a long time. Her shift passed in a blur of activity plates balanced, drinks refilled, polite smiles exchanged, but the note lingered in her thoughts. It was a small act of kindness, and yet it made her feel seen. She couldn't remember the last time someone had noticed her, let alone thanked her. When she finally trudged home that night, her feet aching and her back sore, she pulled the note from her pocket and read it again, under the glow of her small kitchen lamp. "Keep going. The world needs people like you." Emily let out a shaky breath, tears stinging her eyes. It was silly, really such a small thing, and yet it felt monumental. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's life began to shift in ways she hadn't expected. The projects with David Foster and Carter Designs brought steady work, and slowly her confidence grew. She found herself sketching late into the night, ideas flowing faster than her pencil could move. For the first time in a long time, she felt capable like the version of herself she'd lost all those years ago. The job at Ambrosia remained part of her routine, but it no longer felt like a burden. She took comfort in the structure of it, the familiarity of the evening crowd, and the steady rhythm of serving tables. And the unexpected kindness didn't stop there. One afternoon, Emily returned home from a meeting to find a small package waiting at her doorstep. She frowned as she picked it up, her name scrawled neatly across the top. Inside was a bundle of baby clothes, soft onesies, in gentle shades of blue and cream. There was no note, no indication of who had sent it, but Emily's throat tightened as she ran her fingers over the fabric. Whoever it was, they had thought of her, thought of Henry. She placed the clothes carefully on the couch and sank down beside them, letting out a deep breath. Ryan sat in his office that evening, staring blankly at his phone. The messages from his contacts had grown steady notes about how talented Emily was, how impressed they were with her work. Yet Ryan felt strangely detached from his success. Claire knocked lightly on the door. "Your 6 o'clock meeting is waiting," she said. Ryan hesitated. "Cancel it. I'm heading out for the night." Claire's brow furrowed. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," he replied, standing and grabbing his coat. "I just need some air." He stepped out of the building into the cool evening, hands shoved into his pockets as he started walking. His feet carried him toward a familiar part of the city, Emily's neighborhood. He didn't know why he was there or what he hoped to see, but before he knew it, he was standing across the street from her building. He spotted her window almost immediately. A warm glow spilled through the curtains, and for a moment he could see her silhouette as she moved through the room, carrying something small, probably more baby supplies. Ryan's chest tightened. She was building something beautiful, something real, despite everything she'd been through. And for the first time, he understood how much stronger she was than he had ever been. Turning away, Ryan exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the chill of the evening air. "She doesn't need saving," he reminded himself. "She's doing it on her own." Still, he couldn't help but feel that watching her rebuild her life was teaching him something too. Back in her apartment, Emily sat on the couch, holding one of the new baby onesies in her lap. She stared down at the soft fabric, thinking about the past few weeks, the small jobs, the kind words, the moments of hope that kept arriving, just when she needed them most. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to believe that things were changing. Slowly, yes, but they were changing. And that was enough. The sunlight filtered gently through the windows of Ambrosia as Emily tied her apron around her waist, settling into the familiar rhythm of her evening shift. Despite the ache in her feet and the nagging fatigue that seemed to follow her everywhere lately, there was a new energy within her, subtle but real. For weeks now, her life had been shifting in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her design business was finally taking on momentum, bringing in new projects that gave her hope. She had even started to believe that, with enough persistence, she could build something lasting for herself and the baby. Still, her mind lingered on the small, inexplicable moments that had begun to thread themselves through her days. The anonymous note at the restaurant, the unexpected baby clothes on her doorstep, the clients who seemed to come out of nowhere, each one praising her work like they had known about her talent all along. Emily never questioned good fortune she couldn't afford to, but lately she felt like someone was nudging her forward, a quiet force in the background that she couldn't see but could somehow feel. Across town, Ryan sat at the edge of a polished mahogany conference table, the boardroom quiet, except for the low hum of the city beyond the windows. Caldwell Enterprises executives filled the seats around him, all sharply dressed and focused, as Ryan finished outlining his latest proposal. "All right," he said, tapping the digital presentation closed. "Let's move forward on this. I want the numbers finalized by Monday." "Yes, sir," his team replied in unison. As they filtered out of the room, Ryan lingered behind, rubbing his temples. He had always thrived in moments like this, high-stakes decisions and strategic victories. But lately, even these triumphs felt hollow. His mind kept drifting back to Emily, the way her shoulders had seemed less burdened the last time he'd seen her at the restaurant. For weeks now, Ryan had quietly been pushing opportunities her way. He had contacted people he trusted, business owners, real estate developers, designers, nudging them toward Emily's portfolio with nothing but a simple suggestion. It was working. She didn't know it was him, but that was the point. He didn't want credit. He just wanted to see her succeed. But for how long can you stay hidden? The thought unsettled him. Helping her from the shadows was easier. It spared them both the awkwardness of confronting their shared past. Yet, every time he heard about her progress, a part of him longed to know how she was really doing. To see her smile again. To hear her say things were finally okay. He sighed, reaching for his phone. His finger hovered over Sarah's name before he thought better of it. Instead, he stood, grabbed his coat, and left the building. Emily arrived home late that night, her feet dragging as she unlocked the door to her apartment. The place was quiet and dark, the air heavy with the scent of the lavender candle she always burned to calm herself after work. She set her bag down and flicked on the light, letting out a small sigh as her shoulders sagged. The day had been long, and Henry was restless tonight. He'd spent half her shift pressing against her ribs, a gentle reminder that he was almost here. Before she could sit, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Emily grabbed it and glanced at the screen. Sarah Matthews. She smiled faintly and picked up. "Hey, Sarah." "Hey yourself," Sarah said. "How was the shift?" "Long, as always," Emily replied, leaning back against the counter. "But not terrible. Tips were decent tonight." "You work too hard," Sarah teased gently. "But listen, I have news. A small furniture boutique uptown is looking for a designer to redo their interior. Guess who they asked me about?" Emily frowned, confused. "Me?" "Yup," Sarah said. "Apparently, someone recommended your name to them last week. I didn't catch the full story, but they want to see your portfolio." Emily's heart gave a strange flutter. "Another recommendation?" "Sarah, who's been recommending me?" she asked softly, though the question wasn't really directed at Sarah. It was something she'd been asking herself for days now. "I have no idea," Sarah replied honestly. "But who cares, Em? Whoever it is, they've got great taste. You're finally getting the recognition you deserve." Emily let out a small, bewildered laugh. "It's just strange, you know? My work struggled for months, and then suddenly—" "I know," Sarah said gently, "but maybe it's time you stop looking for an explanation. Good things happen sometimes, Em. Maybe it's just your turn." Emily smiled faintly. though the nagging questions didn't quite disappear. Maybe. The following evening, Emily stood in the back alley of Ambrosia, taking a moment's break during her shift. The restaurant was full as usual, the hum of conversation spilling through the propped-open kitchen door. She leaned against the brick wall, pressing a hand absent-mindedly to her belly. Her mind buzzed with thoughts, her next steps for the Carter Designs project, her meeting with the furniture boutique, and, of course, the mysterious recommendations. Stop overthinking it, she told herself. Sarah was right. Good things happen sometimes, and maybe it was her turn. She exhaled a deep breath and looked up only to freeze as Ryan Caldwell rounded the corner. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The alley was dimly lit, but even in the half-light, Emily could see the familiar lines of his face. He looked out of place here, his coat sharp and tailored, his shoes polished, as though he had just walked away from some high-stakes deal. "Ryan," she said, her voice careful. "What are you doing here?" Ryan hesitated, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I was just passing by." Emily narrowed her eyes, skeptical. "Since when do you pass through this part of town?" He smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Fair point." "What do you want, Ryan?" He exhaled, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. "How are you doing?" Emily blinked at him, caught off guard by the softness in his tone. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Really?" Ryan asked, tilting his head. "Because it looks like you're doing more than fine, Emily. Your business, it's taking off, isn't it?" Emily stiffened, immediately on edge. "How do you know about that?" Ryan hesitated, as though he'd said more than he intended. "Sarah mentioned it," he said quickly, though the lie felt thin. Emily studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Something about the way he looked at her, the quiet pride mixed with a hint of guilt, made her chest tighten. "Why do you care?" she asked softly, the question lingering in the cool evening air. Ryan's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked like he might turn and walk away, but instead he met her gaze. "Because I do. I care, Emily. I always have." Emily's heart gave an uncomfortable thud. "That's not true. You cared about your work. Your success." Ryan flinched, the words hitting their mark. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I got it wrong back then. I chose all the wrong things, and I let you down. But I see it now." The silence stretched between them, heavy with words unspoken. "Why are you here, Ryan?" Emily asked again, though her voice had lost some of its edge. Ryan sighed, glancing away for a moment before looking back at her. "Because I wanted to know how you're doing, and because I'm proud of you, Emily, for everything you're doing on your own." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard, and for a fleeting second, she felt something soften in her chest. "I don't need you to feel sorry for me," she said quietly. "I don't," Ryan replied quickly. "I just—" He trailed off, searching for the right words. "You don't need saving, Emily. I know that. I just want to see you happy." Emily stared at him, unsure what to say. She wanted to be angry, wanted to tell him to leave and never come back. But instead, she just felt tired. Tired of holding on to old hurt. Finally, she nodded. "Thanks, Ryan." Ryan looked at her for a long moment, as though he wanted to say more. But then he simply nodded, his shoulders relaxing ever so slightly. "Good night, Emily." He turned and walked back around the corner, disappearing into the evening. Emily stayed where she was, her heart unsettled. Why now? And why did part of her wish he hadn't left? The first chill of autumn was in the air the next morning, as Emily sat in her small kitchen, a steaming mug of coffee cradled in her hands. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the city outside buzzed softly, alive with morning routines. Emily's thoughts, however, refused to settle. Ryan. His words from the night before echoed in her mind. "You don't need saving, Emily. I just want to see you happy." She had expected pity from him, maybe condescension or guilt-ridden apologies. But not that. Not pride. Not sincerity. Why now? She wondered again. After all this time, after all the nights she had struggled to make ends meet, why had Ryan Caldwell suddenly reappeared? She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, her mind tugging at loose threads she couldn't tie together. Then there were the other mysteries: the note at the restaurant, the baby clothes on her doorstep, and most of all, the sudden surge in opportunities for her design business. People with real influence had started noticing her, reaching out, as though some invisible hand was guiding them toward her name. She had ignored it at first, grateful for the work. But now, as she sat alone in her apartment, the timing felt connected. No, she thought, shaking her head. It couldn't be. And yet, deep down, a suspicion had already begun to take root. That afternoon, Emily met with her newest client, the furniture boutique owner, in the stylish uptown shop. The space was lovely, sunlight streaming through tall windows, warm wooden floors, and shelves brimming with carefully curated pieces. Angela Carter's recommendation had clearly made an impression because the boutique's owner, a sharp woman named Madeline Porter, wasted no time expressing her excitement. "I've been following your work since Angela mentioned you," Madeline said, flipping through Emily's portfolio with a smile. "Your designs are thoughtful. I love how you incorporate warmth into even modern spaces." Emily offered a polite smile, though the familiar unease tugged at her. "Thank you. I'm excited about the opportunity. Angela said you've been doing this for years. You must have a lot of great connections in the industry," Madeline added casually. Emily hesitated. "Not exactly. It's mostly word of mouth, I suppose." Madeline glanced up, intrigued. "Well, whoever's been recommending you knows their stuff. You're clearly the real deal." Emily managed another smile, but her thoughts swirled with doubt. Whoever's been recommending you, it wasn't random. Someone was behind this, and deep down, Emily could only think of one person. That evening, after her meeting, Emily found herself walking home instead of catching a cab. The air was crisp and cool, the kind of autumn evening that made the city feel alive. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the sidewalk as she passed cafes, shops, and crowds of people starting their nights. Her thoughts, however, were locked on Ryan. The quiet way he had spoken to her in the alley, his presence out of place and unexpected, yet somehow steady. The pieces began to click together, one by one. The sudden jobs, the anonymous note, the way opportunities had appeared at precisely the moments she needed them most. Ryan. Emily stopped walking abruptly, her heart pounding. It couldn't be. He wouldn't, would he? As the city bustled around her, she found herself staring blankly at her reflection in a shop window, her breath fogging the glass. What did he want? Why now? And more importantly, why did part of her not feel angry? The questions buzzed in her mind all the way home. Ryan sat in the quiet of his penthouse that same night, nursing a glass of water as he scrolled through his emails. Updates about Emily's projects continued to flow in from the people he had discreetly connected her with: developers praising her creativity, clients raving about her professionalism. It was working. She was thriving. And yet, Ryan couldn't shake the unease settling in his chest. The last time he had spoken to Emily in the alley, he had seen something in her eyes, a glimmer of suspicion, like she was starting to put the pieces together. What happens if she finds out? He ran a hand through his hair, leaning back on the couch. The truth was, he hadn't thought this far ahead. When he first reached out to his contacts, it had been about making things right, about giving Emily the opportunities she deserved. He didn't want her gratitude, and he didn't want her to feel indebted to him. But now it was more complicated. Because the closer she got to rebuilding her life, the more Ryan realized how much he still cared. And that terrified him. The next evening, Emily finished her shift at Ambrosia and stepped outside into the cool night air. Her breath puffed in small clouds as she wrapped her coat more tightly around herself, her thoughts still consumed by everything she had pieced together. Before she could take a step, a familiar voice broke through the quiet. Emily. She turned sharply, her pulse jumping as she spotted Ryan standing near the entrance. He looked out of place again, his tailored coat, his polished shoes, yet his presence no longer surprised her. "Ryan," she said, her tone measured, "what are you doing here?" He took a cautious step closer, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I wanted to check in, see how you're doing." Emily studied him carefully. "You've been doing more than checking in, haven't you?" Ryan blinked, his expression faltering. "What do you mean?" She crossed her arms over her chest, her voice low but steady. "The clients, the jobs, the recommendations. It's you, aren't it?" Ryan's face froze for a split second, just enough for her to see the truth before he tried to recover. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Ryan," Emily said sharply. "You think I can't figure it out? My business was struggling for months. Then, out of nowhere, people start calling me people who have no reason to know who I am. And then there's you, showing up here, asking questions, acting like you care about how I'm doing. Tell me I'm wrong." Ryan's shoulders sagged, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. Finally, he met her gaze, his voice soft. "You're not wrong." Emily's chest tightened, a rush of emotions swelling inside her: anger, confusion, and something she couldn't quite name. "Why?" Ryan stepped closer, his eyes earnest. "Because I wanted to help. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing, Emily. I know I messed up before I let you down in every way that mattered, but this was something I could do, and I thought if you didn't know, you'd take the opportunities because you earned them. Because you did!" Emily stared at him, her throat tight. "You had no right," she whispered. "I know," Ryan said quietly, "but I couldn't let you struggle alone." Emily shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "I am doing it alone, Ryan. I've been doing it alone this whole time. I didn't ask for your help." "I know," Ryan repeated. "But you deserved it, Emily. You deserved every opportunity. I just wanted to help you see that." The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Emily looked away, her heart pounding. She wanted to yell at him, to push him away for interfering in her life. But at the same time, part of her couldn't ignore the truth in his words. He hadn't done it for himself. He hadn't asked for credit. And the jobs, those were hers. She had earned them. Still, it hurt. "I need time," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to do with this, Ryan. I just need time." Ryan nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I understand." Without another word, Emily turned and walked down the alley, her footsteps echoing into the quiet night. As she disappeared around the corner, Ryan stood alone under the faint glow of the streetlight, the weight of the truth settling heavily on his shoulders. For the first time since all of this began, he wondered if he had made everything worse. Emily spent the next morning seated at her small dining table, staring at a sketch pad filled with lines she'd drawn without thought. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second pressing on her like a weight. She hadn't slept much. After Ryan's confession the night before, her thoughts had spiraled endlessly. She had always prided herself on fighting her own battles, on surviving even when everything seemed stacked against her. Yet, there he was, Ryan Caldwell, quietly placing stepping stones under her feet when she hadn't asked for them. She wasn't angry, or maybe she was. It was hard to tell where one feeling ended and the next began. Why now? Why him? Her chest tightened as memories surfaced uninvited. Late nights in their first apartment, the sound of his laughter during better times, the arguments that echoed as they fell apart. He had always chased something bigger, pushing himself harder than anyone should, while she had been the one asking for balance for him to see her. And now, here he was, trying to make up for it. The thought made her throat ache. She pressed her hands to her face, her breaths coming slow and steady as she forced herself to regroup. The knock at the door startled her. Emily glanced toward the entrance, wiping her hands on her sweatpants before standing. She didn't get visitors, just the occasional delivery or neighbor dropping off mail. She opened the door and blinked. Sarah stood there, holding 2 coffees and wearing her usual grin, though her eyes quickly narrowed. "You look awful," Sarah said by way of greeting. Emily smirked faintly, stepping aside. "Good morning to you too." Sarah entered, handing Emily one of the coffees as she flopped onto the couch. "I figured you'd need this. You didn't sound like yourself on the phone last night." Emily leaned against the counter, holding the warm cup in her hands. "I didn't sleep much." Sarah gave her a look. "You want to tell me what's going on, or do I have to guess?" Emily hesitated, staring down into her coffee before answering softly. "It's Ryan." Sarah froze, her expression turning serious. "Ryan? What about him?" Emily let out a shaky breath. "He's the one behind it, Sarah. The clients, the recommendations, all of it. He admitted it last night." Sarah's brow furrowed as she set her coffee on the table. "Wait, what? He's been helping you behind the scenes?" Emily nodded slowly, forcing herself to meet Sarah's gaze. "Apparently, he's been calling people he knows and telling them about my work. He thought if I didn't know it was him, I'd take the opportunities without feeling like I owed him anything." For a moment, Sarah didn't say anything. Then she let out a low whistle. "Wow, that's unexpected." Emily scoffed lightly. "Tell me about it." Sarah leaned back, studying her. "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know," Emily admitted. "Part of me feels angry. I didn't ask for his help, and he knows I wouldn't have taken it if I'd known. But—" She hesitated, gripping the cup tighter. "Another part of me can't deny that he's helped me. The jobs, those are mine. I earned them. He just gave me the chance to prove it." Sarah tilted her head thoughtfully. "You don't sound as mad as you should be." Emily sighed, sinking onto the couch across from her. "That's the problem. I want to be mad, but I can't be not completely. He didn't ask for credit. He wasn't trying to control me or swoop in to fix everything. He just cared." Sarah's eyes softened. "Sounds like someone trying to make up for something." "Maybe," Emily murmured. "But why now, Sarah? After all these years, why does he care?" Sarah shrugged. "Guilt changes people. Maybe seeing you again made him realize what he lost." Emily looked down at her coffee, her mind swirling. She wanted to believe that, but believing it meant opening herself up to the possibility of trusting Ryan again. And that scared her. That afternoon, Emily sat in her studio, her small, cluttered sanctuary, and stared at her latest sketches. Her mind refused to focus. Everything she tried to create felt half-formed, lacking the confidence and energy her work usually carried. With a sigh, she leaned back in her chair, her hand brushing over her growing belly. "I don't know what to do, Henry," she whispered softly. "Do I let him back in? Do I trust him?" The sound of her phone buzzing jolted her. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It was Darren, her manager at Ambrosia. "Hello?" "Emily? Good news," Darren said cheerfully. "I've been meaning to tell you this, but I didn't catch you before your shift ended yesterday." "Good news?" Emily repeated warily. "Yeah. A guy came in last night, business type. Looked important. He left a hefty tip and told me to pass this along." Emily's stomach tightened. "What did he say?" Darren's voice turned more serious. He said, "Tell her she doesn't have to work this hard anymore. I figured it might mean something to you." Emily froze, her pulse quickening. "Ryan." "You all right, Monroe?" Darren asked after a pause. Emily swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks, Darren." As she ended the call, her heart pounded in her chest. Ryan was trying to make a point, wasn't he? Trying to tell her again that she didn't have to struggle alone. Emily stood up abruptly, pacing the length of the room, her thoughts tangled like a knot she couldn't untie. She didn't want his pity, but deep down, she knew that wasn't what he was offering. He was showing up in ways she hadn't expected, ways that made it harder to keep holding on to her anger. That evening, as the city dimmed into night, Emily found herself standing outside Ryan's office building. She hadn't planned to come here, but her feet had carried her with a sense of purpose she couldn't ignore. The lobby was quiet as she entered, the polished floors gleaming under the bright lights. She approached the receptionist, her voice steady despite the nerves buzzing through her. "I'm here to see Ryan Caldwell." The woman looked up, surprised. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Emily said simply, "but I think he'll want to see me." The receptionist hesitated, then nodded. "One moment." Minutes later, Emily found herself stepping into Ryan's spacious office. He was seated at his desk, his back to her, as he stared out the window, the glow of the city casting his silhouette in shadow. "Ryan," Emily said softly. He turned sharply, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her. "Emily." There was a beat of silence as they stared at each other. Emily took a slow breath and stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I know what you're doing," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "The clients, the tips, the notes. It's all you, aren't it?" Ryan didn't deny it. He stood, his expression a mixture of apprehension and guilt. "It's me." "Why?" she asked, the word trembling in the air between them. "Why now?" Ryan let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "Because I let you down, Emily. I failed you when it mattered most. I spent so many years chasing success, and I lost sight of everything that really mattered. You. Us." He paused, his voice softening. "Seeing you again, it made me realize how wrong I was. I couldn't fix what I broke, but I thought maybe I could help you build something better." Emily's throat tightened. "You didn't have to do that, Ryan." "I know," he said quietly, "but I wanted to." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emily searched his face, looking for any trace of pity or ulterior motives, but all she saw was honesty, raw and real. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted finally. "You don't have to do anything," Ryan replied. "I just wanted you to know." Emily looked away, her thoughts swirling. She had spent so long holding on to the hurt he'd caused, but standing here now, she realized that something had changed. Maybe Ryan had changed. And maybe, just maybe, she had too. "I need time," she said softly. Ryan nodded, his expression calm but hopeful. "Take all the time you need." Emily turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Thank you," she said quietly, not looking back. As she stepped into the night, her chest felt both heavy and light at once. She didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to find out. The morning was clear and cool, the first hints of winter creeping into the air. Sunlight streamed through Emily's apartment window, warming the tiny space as she sat on the floor next to Henry's bassinet. She traced slow circles over her belly absent-mindedly, her mind somewhere else entirely stuck in that conversation with Ryan the night before. His words kept replaying in her head. "I couldn't fix what I broke, but I thought maybe I could help you build something better." She hadn't known how to respond. For years, she had built walls around herself to keep out the pain of their past. It was easier that way, safer. But Ryan was chipping away at them slowly, carefully, in ways she hadn't expected. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was trying to earn it. Emily let out a shaky breath, her fingers brushing over the soft edge of a folded onesie sitting on the coffee table. The baby clothes had arrived weeks ago, anonymously, but now she knew where they'd come from. Ryan. He had been there the whole time, working in the background, nudging her toward the opportunities she'd been too tired or discouraged to find on her own. She didn't know whether to be angry, grateful, or something in between. "What do you want, Emily?" she asked herself, her voice silent but steady. She had spent so long defining herself by what she didn't need, by the pride of doing everything on her own, without anyone's help. But now, sitting here, her hands trembling just slightly, Emily realized that maybe it wasn't about doing it alone. Maybe it was about knowing when to let someone in. Ryan stared out the window of his office later that day, the skyline sprawling beneath a pale blue sky. On his desk sat a dozen unopened emails and reports updates from his executive team, business pitches, and investment opportunities. But for once, Ryan found he couldn't care less. His mind was on Emily. He thought about the way she had looked at him the night before, conflicted, guarded, but not as closed off as she once had been. He hadn't expected her to forgive him overnight. How could she? He had let her down when it mattered most. But he also knew he couldn't keep living in the past. Ryan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. For years, his life had been about controlling outcomes, chasing success, proving something to himself and the world. But what he felt for Emily, and the guilt he carried, didn't fit neatly into any of those boxes. A soft knock at the door broke through his thoughts. "Mr. Caldwell?" Claire, his assistant, stood in the doorway, her brows furrowed with concern. "You've been quiet today. Is everything all right?" Ryan turned to face her, forcing a faint smile. "Yeah, just distracted." Claire hesitated before speaking. "Forgive me for saying this, sir, but it seems like you've been distracted a lot lately." Ryan studied her for a long moment. Claire had worked for him for years, loyal, dependable, and sharp. She knew him well enough to see through the polished facade. "I've been reevaluating some things," he admitted finally. Claire tilted her head slightly, curious. "Anything I can help with?" Ryan shook his head, his smile turning genuine. "Not this time, Claire, but thank you." She nodded and stepped back into the hall, leaving Ryan alone again. He sat at his desk, tapping his fingers against the smooth wood, the weight of his next decision settling in his chest. He didn't want to disappear from Emily's life, but he also couldn't keep walking this delicate line of being there and not being there. It wasn't fair to either of them. Ryan grabbed his coat and stepped out of his office, a new determination solidifying in his steps. That evening, Emily sat at the dining table, flipping through fabric swatches and sketches. The boutique office redesign was underway, and she had promised Madeline she'd finalize the layout this week. Her phone buzzed, startling her. She glanced at the screen, her chest tightening slightly when she saw the name, Ryan Caldwell. For a moment, she considered letting it ring. Then, with a slow breath, she answered. "Hello?" "Hi, Emily," Ryan said, his voice calm and steady. "Do you have a minute?" Emily hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of a pencil. "I guess so. What's going on?" There was a pause before Ryan spoke again. I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out, even if you don't want to." "Ryan, please," he interrupted gently. "It'll only take a minute." Emily sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Fine, I'm listening." "I know I haven't earned your trust," Ryan began, his voice low but sincere. "I know I broke it a long time ago, and I know I can't fix that overnight, maybe not ever. But I need you to know that I'm not helping you out of guilt or pity, or because I think you need saving. I'm helping because I see how strong you are, and because I believe in you. You deserve every opportunity you're getting, Emily. You've earned them." Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight. Ryan continued. "I didn't understand that before. I was too wrapped up in my own ambition to see what we had. I'm trying to be better now, not because I expect anything from you, but because it's the right thing to do." Emily closed her eyes, the honesty in his voice settling over her like a weight. For so long, she had carried the hurt of what happened between them. She had convinced herself that Ryan was selfish, that he had cared more about his success than about her. And maybe that had been true then. But it wasn't true now. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I don't know how to move past all of this." "You don't have to," he replied quietly. "Not yet. I just want you to know that I'm here. For you. For the baby. For whatever you need." Emily's chest ached at his words, a mix of emotions swirling inside her: relief, confusion, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I need time," she admitted, echoing the words she'd said the night before. "I know," Ryan said simply. "Take all the time you need, Emily." They sat in silence for a moment before Emily finally spoke. "Thank you, Ryan, for everything." Ryan's voice was soft but steady. "You're welcome." When the call ended, Emily set the phone down and let out a long breath, tears blurring her vision. She wasn't sure what this meant, what they meant, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel so alone. 2 months later, Henry arrived. The labor was long, and the hours passed in a blur of pain, encouragement, and the overwhelming weight of it all. When the nurse finally placed him in her arms, Emily felt the world slow to a stop. He was small, soft, and perfect. Sarah was there, squeezing her hand as Emily cried softly into Henry's blanket. "You did it, Em," Sarah whispered. "He's here." Later that evening, after the chaos had quieted and Henry was sleeping in the hospital bassinet, Emily looked up to see Ryan standing hesitantly at the door. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Sarah called me. I hope it's okay that I came." Emily stared at him for a long moment before nodding. "It's okay." Ryan stepped inside slowly, his gaze falling on the sleeping baby. For a moment he didn't speak. Then, quietly, he said, "He's beautiful." Emily smiled faintly, exhaustion and peace washing over her in equal measure. "Thank you." Ryan hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" Emily looked up at him, her expression soft. "I think I'm going to be." Ryan nodded, something unspoken passing between them. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a beginning. As he sat quietly in the chair beside her, watching Henry sleep, Emily let herself hope for the first time in years. Maybe they could rebuild something, not the life they had lost, but something new, something better. And in that quiet hospital room, surrounded by love and the promise of new beginnings, Emily knew they would find a way forward, together. The sun dipped low on the horizon as Emily sat on a park bench. Henry nestled snugly in her arms. The autumn air was crisp, and golden leaves floated lazily to the ground around them. Across the park, children laughed as they played, their carefree joy infectious. Emily smiled softly, brushing a finger over Henry's tiny hand as he slept. She glanced up as footsteps approached, and there was Ryan, walking toward them with a relaxed, unhurried pace. He held 2 paper cups of coffee, the steam rising faintly in the chill air. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing one to her. "Thank you," Emily replied, the words carrying more meaning than just for the coffee. Ryan sat beside her, a comfortable silence settling between them as they watched the world go by. He looked different now, calmer, less like the sharp-edged businessman she once knew, and more like the man she had glimpsed in quiet moments long ago. "Henry looks peaceful," Ryan said, smiling down at the baby. "He is," Emily replied, her voice soft. "For now." They both chuckled quietly, the sound light and natural. For months, they had been learning how to navigate the fragile connection between them, slowly building trust, carefully treading the path between their past and what lay ahead. There were no guarantees, but that was okay. Life was rarely perfect, and Emily had learned that the most meaningful things were built one small step at a time. "I'm proud of you, you know," Ryan said suddenly, his voice steady but earnest. You've built this life on your own, and it's beautiful." Emily looked at him, a warmth spreading in her chest. "Thank you, Ryan, for believing in me even when I didn't." Ryan nodded, his expression softening. "I always will." They sat there a little longer, side by side, the hum of the park filling the spaces where words didn't need to be. It wasn't the end of their story, just a new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining us on Emily and Ryan's journey of resilience, forgiveness, and second chances. Life often throws unexpected challenges our way, but it also brings moments of kindness, hope, and growth if we're brave enough to accept them. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories like this one. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about Emily and Ryan's story? Have you experienced a second chance in your own life? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're ready for more tales of love, growth, and redemption, stay tuned. There's so much more to share, and we can't wait to take you along on the journey. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. Don't forget to subscribe to Hard Ventures for stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the power of hope.